Big week of MMA on tap as Strikeforce is back in Dallas and the heavyweight Grand Prix back in the cage. I'm excited about this. Kevin Iole is here with us, our lead YAHOO MMA analyst, writer, and let's get your feeling on it. It's a wide open field right now with the heavyweights. I think this decides an awful lot.
I agree. I mean, I think that certainly the winner of this tournament is going to be, at least in the top four, you would think, in the world in heavyweights, maybe even higher. Certainly Dana White wasn't willing to commit that the winner of the tournament would be any higher than the best fighter in Strikeforce. But I think it's a good field, and if you come out of winning this tournament, that you put yourself in position to be able to argue that you deserve a fight against the UFC top guy.
I have real concerns about Shane Carwin after the Junior Dos Santos fight. And I think Dos Santos is great, but to me, Shane is kind of a one-trick pony at this point based on power. I think when Lesnar comes back, it's going to be the same deal. I look at this field, and I think Overeem, I think Barnett, and I think Bigfoot Silva all have a chance to be the guys kind of right behind Cain Velasquez and JDS.
Well, I agree with you from one standpoint. I think there's no doubt that Cain Velasquez is the best heavyweight in the world. I think he's proven that with what he's done. I've been on this guy for a long time, and I'm just getting higher on him as I see all these other guys fight. I think Cain, assuming he's healthy and with his rotator cuff, we don't know. I mean, if he's healthy and he's back to what he was, I think there's no question he's not only the best in the world. I think he's going to separate himself. I would expect him to beat Junior Dos Santos. As far about Shane, I was disappointed in what I saw from Shane. Shane, I had picked him to win the fight. I thought he had two things going for him that would help him beat Junior Dos Santos, which was his punching power and his wrestling. But, when you look at it, his has not really been a factor in his MMA game. And I thought, going into the Dos Santos fight, I thought that was because he really didn't need it. He relied on his power so much. And I thought, well, okay, a guy that's such a good boxer, he's going to use his wrestling, but it just did not seem like his wrestling was a factor. Dos Santos stuffed all his takedowns early. I think he's really got to sharpen his MMA wrestling and then work on his overall boxing skill. I mean, Junior Dos Santos is a really good boxer for MMA. But he won that fight with a jab and takedown defense. That's really what he did, and I think Shane needs to take it up. But whenever you can punch like Shane, and you do have the background in wrestling, that you're going to be a factor. I just think that maybe he hadn't drilled his wrestling enough, and maybe he's let his wrestling, because he's hadn't had to rely on it all that much, get away from him. So I think he needs to get back to being a wrestler.
Well, how about the three guys I mentioned in terms of rankings and where they get in the mix with Carwin, Lesnar, Mir behind JDS and Velasquez, if you think they are behind, in terms of Overeem, Barnett, and Bigfoot?
I think right now, Steve, that Cain Velasquez is clearly number one, and I think Dos Santos is clearly number two. I think Dos Santos showed, he's not an offensive wrestler, but good defensive wrestling. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. We haven't really had to see that yet, but I think he's good on the ground. He'd be comfortable grappling, and he's got really good boxing. So I think he's got a good mix that he can go to and work on it. So I think those two guys right now are clearly 1 and 2. I think number 3 is up for grabs. I've rated in the USA Today Bloody ranking at Bloody Elbow rankings. I've had Brock Lesnar sitting at 3 behind Velasquez and Dos Santos. But I think that position is up for grabs. Certainly Brock, has a lot to prove coming off the loss to Cain, and he's got some, issues that are going on out there. And certainly the winner of this tournament would have argument in my mind to be number 3. Josh Barnett, to me, is the best fighter of that group, except that, it's like he fights so rarely and hasn't been around that, what to expect. I mean, Barnett has such a good, well-rounded game, and I have great respect for what he's been able to do over the years. But, with the steroid problems that he's had, the suspensions and the inactivity, you question whether he can still compete at that highest level.
From an odds standpoint, the fight's on Saturday. Barnett, he deserves it reputation-wise, skill set-wise, huge favorite, around minus 350 and minus 365 against Brett Rogers. We know Rogers' biggest skill is, the power punching. Does he have a chance to pull the upset here? And for the reason you just mentioned, that's my concern. I think Barnett fights to the other fighter's strength sometimes. He wants to stand and bang with a guy who can bang, and the other part of it is the inactivity.
I like Barnett in the fight, and I think it's worth laying the money. I mean, you saw Rogers against Fedor have some success, so I think a lot of people started to overrate Rogers. But I think really, what's going on here is that, we were seeing him fight guys toward the end of their careers. He fought Andrei Arlovsky when everybody was knocking out Andrei Arlovsky, and he fought Fedor, just as Fedor was kind of in that gradual decline stage. I don't think anybody and his brother would thought that Brett Rogers would even been close to Fedor when Fedor was anywhere near his prime. But when he fought Brett Rogers, he'd been around a long time, had a long run at the top, and Brett gave him a run for the money. But I don't see the overall game in him that he's going to be able to deal with Josh Barnett. And unless Barnett really has totally lost it, I think he'll be able to handle Brett Rogers.
Overeem also a huge favorite against Verdum. They fought years ago. They were both smaller. In this case, some places have Overeem minus 500. I think that's outrageous. The normal line is around 350, which is still very big. And, I want to make a case for Verdum, and I think his grappling is great. I think his experience is big. I have some worries about Overeem in terms of gas tank, if the fight goes on and on. But I can also see in grappling situations where Overeem is just so big and strong, even the best technique is just going to, just throw him away, and he won't be able to get the fight to the ground.
Yeah, I like Overeem in this fight too. I mean, I think that Verdum is getting a lot of heat because of the win over Fedor again. But I think Verdum to me is just a step below Overeem. I think you're right. You make a very apt point about Alistair's strength. I mean, he's a powerful guy. He's got really good stand-up, really good kicks. I like him to stop Verdum sometime in this fight.
All right, let's look ahead. So we're going with a chalk here, so it's Overeem and Barnett. You match up the semifinals, hopefully sometime, in the fall? Hopefully. Overeem against Bigfoot Silva, I think, is a completely intriguing fight. And then you'd have Barnett against Karatanov. And I think Karatanov's kind of a wild card in this because of his punching power. So out of that, who do you think makes the finals?
Well, I'm gonna go with Overeem and Barnett, and I think that would probably be the dream matchup that Strikeforce would like to see. I think when they made the tournament, they were hoping to get Fedor into the finals, but right now, as it stands, I think to bring Josh Barnett in there, I think that would be the best matchup that they could possibly get. But again, there's so many wild cards in this because the same thing is true of Haratonov. We haven't seen a lot of him, and where does he stand? I mean, he obliterated Andrei Arlovsky. But what do we make of that? Because who hasn't obliterated Andrei? I think that the matchup is going to be Overeem against Josh Barnett, and I would favor Overeem in that. And then we're going to look at him as, okay, is he the number 3 heavyweight in the world? Does he deserve a shot at the UFC champion? Because by the time this tournament finishes, we would assume that Kane would have defended his title against JDS, and it might make for the Strikeforce Grand Prix winner against the UFC champion. It wouldn't be a natural fit.
Do you think that will happen? Didn't sound like that. You do, because when you pressed Dana White on that before the last event, he almost borderline laughed at you.
Well, I had asked him a question because a lot of fans have been saying the winner of the Strikeforce tournament is going to be the best heavyweight in the world. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I asked that question just like it's been asked to me by fans a number of times. I asked Dana that question, will this winner be the best heavyweight in the world? And he was very puzzled by my question. I repeated it, and he said the winner of the tournament will be the best fighter in Strikeforce, the best heavyweight in Strikeforce. But, I think if you look at the track that they're on, and I think it makes a lot of sense. If you have, let's say, especially if you have Overeem win, you have a clear-cut win by Overeem. If you get him in, and then you have the winner of JDS and Cain Velasquez, now who is the best fighter in the world? Because they're going to be 1-2. They're going to be coming from the opposite organizations. We saw that with Rampage and Dan Henderson when they bought Pride. I definitely think that they'll make that fight. It'll be far enough down the road. They'll be into the relationship with Showtime. I think the problem with making the Strikeforce versus UFC fights right now is that UFC is very sensitive to not harming the product on Showtime. They want to make sure that Showtime has a quality product because there was a contract that existed. But they can move guys around and do as they see fit. So I think that would be a big fight, and I think we'll see that. Velasquez JDS winner against the Strikeforce Grand Prix winner when it's all over.